Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Commons this afternoon. It's great to see you. We hope you've had a great week so far. My name is Natalie, and for those who are new to the Commons, this is our name for the Knowledge and Learning Commons, which is a space at UN Geneva to be able to collaborate and learn informally on issues of multilateralism and also professional development. And I work here at the UN Geneva Library and Archives for this Commons. So many of you have been with us since March, since the first lockdown, for a range of sessions with the Staff Councillor's Office on mental health and well-being, especially during this time of COVID-19. So for those who have joined us since then on the various sessions we've been holding, we hope that they've been useful moments for you, and it's been great to be able to question and learn and try and understand a lot of these things together. So for those who missed out on those sessions and are interested, don't worry, you can go over to our website, commons.ungeneva.org, to be able to find those recordings, or you can contact us. We'll give you the details later, and we'll be glad to show you where to find those recordings. We're continuing today with the session that you can see on the screen now, Cultivating Resilience and Adaptability for Work and Life. And I think this year in particular has shown very much the importance of being able to adapt to different situations, which for all of us this year has shown up in different ways. And especially now that winter is arriving and the holiday season as well, how can we best be present and be able to adapt and remain resilient to continuing changing situations, especially when we might not be able to see our close ones in person this year or be able to do all of the things we wanted to during this season. We're very glad to have with us a guest speaker to help us answer these questions, Dr.Alexina Mehta. You'll see her on the screen very soon. She's actually joining us from Vancouver in Canada. It's an early morning start for her, so thank you, Dr. Mehta, for joining us so early. You can see her bio here on the screen as well now. She's a naturopathic physician based in Vancouver, and she's been speaking globally on the topics of health, wellness, and stress management for already 18 years now. And she speaks in a variety of settings, from health institutes to NGOs, large companies, universities, and also among other specific groups in the community. And one of her actual focuses is being able to help individuals to find their way through times of great challenge and change. So thank you, Dr. Mehta, for joining us today. There's a lot that we want to talk to you about, and I'm sure there's a lot we could even explore within this topic itself, but we just have an hour. So now on the screen, you're going to see what we hope to learn from this session. And these are our learning objectives here: to firstly understand a little bit more about the science of resilience and adaptability, and how to strengthen these two traits within us. Dr. Mehta will particularly be looking at what this means in terms of neurobiology and also the science of hope, a very interesting topic. And also, number two, to understand the pillars of resilience. If you don't know these already, we'll find out later in the session, and come away with some tools to be able to help build this type of resilience and support self-care and well-being for us, and of course to be able to support those around us too. So Dr. Mehta will be guiding us through this topic today. Before she begins, we have a brief opening from our staff councillors, Mary Leahy and Rosa van der Heide, who've been with us since March for these sessions. They'll just be explaining a little bit more about the office and how to contact them should you need to as well. There's also time for Q&A, so we'd be glad to hear your questions, especially on the topic today. So don't hesitate to just write in your questions in the live event Q&A. You'll find the little box here to the right of your screen, and we'll be glad to hopefully answer as many questions that you have as possible. Also at the Commons, we do love to be interactive. So if you have your phone with you, or it's okay if you can use your desktop too, we're going to use Slido for a few questions and reflections together. So we're actually going to start now, if you'd like, with the first warm-up question. You can scan this QR code on the screen with your phone, or if you don't have your phone, no worries, you can just type in slido.com into your desktop. The code is resilience. Great. You can see on the screen here now the first question. Just taking a moment to check in with ourselves today. What would you like to particularly learn from today's session? We'll go ahead and meet you over there on Slido when you're ready. It could be something about resilience, what it actually means, adaptability, the difference between the two, how to deal with stress. Thank you for sending that one in. How to be positive, Happiness, how to be resilient. Very good. Great. Perhaps even how resilience can be learnt, or adaptability. Be hopeful. Yes, we were just talking about that before we began the event as well today. The importance of hope. Balance. Great. Okay. Coping. How to be resilient. That's coming up as the biggest. So Dr. Mehta, hopefully this is a bit of feedback for you as we begin the session today. You can go ahead and keep bringing those in as we go along. Excellent. Thank you for being a part of that. And thinking about that is a great way to begin the session too. So off to Dr. Mehta very soon, but firstly to hear from our staff counsellors. Over to you, Mary.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction, Natalie. So yes, it's our pleasure today to introduce Dr. Alexina Mehta, and we're very happy to have her here with us to join us in this series of webinars and dialogues. So many of you know us, but for those who don't, we're based here in Geneva, but we also work with many of you in the field as well. And the way you can contact us, the quickest way is through staffcounsellor@un.org. And if you have questions today, please, like Natalie said, post your questions in the Q&A part, but you can also reach out to us individually, especially if there's something sensitive that you might not like to ask. And also if you would like to set up a session, if you would like to see one of us after, please get in touch. But thank you very much, and I hope you will enjoy today's session. And I'll just hand over to Rosa now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mary. Of course, it's a pleasure to see you all today, even though we're not able to see you. I think it's a very difficult time, like Natalie already mentioned. The days are getting darker, the holiday season is approaching, and we're still in lots of uncertainty. So I'm very, very happy that Dr. Alexina Mehta is here today, and that can help us a bit to how can we find hope? How can we be more resilient and adaptable in these difficult times? I was reading an article the other day that said the world is on fire, and that really kept in my mind, and I really am looking forward to hear from Alexina. How are we dealing with this? So I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Alexina Mehta. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Natalie, Rosa, and Mary, and the entire team that have come together to put this wonderful opportunity for learning and growth together for all of us to come together as a community and to learn and share and become inspired by what we can do in these times to be the best that we can be in the midst of the challenges and obstacles that we are facing. So as mentioned, I'm Dr. Alexina Mehta from Vancouver, Canada, and it's a true pleasure to be here with all of you today, and welcome to this event. On to the next slide, please. So let's take a moment to unpack what adaptability is. And what I'd like to invite everybody to do here today is to take a moment as we go through all the material presented and apply it to yourself. So when we listen to knowledge and information, we want to be able to take that into our own life situation so that we can connect to the innate wisdom that lives within ourselves. And that is the best way to take knowledge, is to put it into action immediately. And that comes with listening with our ears, but also listening with our hearts. So let's look here at the first description. The ability to be creative and flexible in the face of new situations. So in the midst of all of the changes that we've all been experiencing, take a moment to acknowledge what was your initial reaction, and how did you mentally and physically process that? Over time, how did you respond? Now, this can give you information about how you initially coped with the situation. And we want to use this as a guide because from here we can learn what else we can do in order to improve our ability to cope and to adapt to the current situation and also future situations that may arise. Remember, the point of this is to improve ourselves and improve our personal ability to respond. Some people may have shut down in the face of the challenges. Others may have started doing a lot of reading. So it's helpful to know what is your strategy innately or mechanically following a stressful situation. And from there, what else can you do? So remember that change is like a rip current. You may get taken down at first, but remember that another tide will come and it will carry you through on to the next change. Often when we get stuck, we forget this fact. So if you look back on your own life, at previous experiences that you've had, and you see how you coped, you'll see that you were carried forward many, many times. And so this situation, although at times may seem more challenging, it's really not that different than previous challenging situations that you have encountered. Much of it has to do with our perception of the situation. If we look at the second aspect, the capacity to cope with and capitalize on change, and the ability to recover when unforeseen events alter life plans. So every time we encounter an obstacle or a challenge, this is an opportunity for us to grow. And many would say that the purpose of a human life is to grow and to learn. And so isn't that what we're all doing right now? And to be able to do it together, collectively, which is exactly what's going on, is a fascinating experiment to be part of, isn't it? We can learn from people in other countries and how they've been adapting and coping, and we can access our own personal resources from our creative aspect of ourselves to see how we can cope in the future. And the third aspect, the essence of adaptability, is finding ways to respond to the unpredictable, the different, uncertain, and novel by swapping old ways for workarounds or improvements. So again, we're pointing to improvement, creativity, growth, transformation. And these are all attributes of all human beings. On to the next slide, please. So I think it's very helpful to understand what happens to our brain and our nervous system during a stressful event. Now, if you really think about it, stressful events happen all day long. From the moment that we wake up to the evening, we're encountering something that is going to make us assess the situation and think about how we're going to respond to it. So a stress is something that pushes us towards transformation. And we have two different aspects of our brain that can help us with this stress. So we're looking at the primitive aspect right now. This is the aspect of the hindbrain, where initially our senses perceive a stressor, and our senses can be sight, taste, touch, sound, smell. So we take that in, and in this example here, it's through sight. We take that perception in, and then our brain processes it very, very quickly before we can even actually think about it. And then we have what's called the fight or flight or freeze response that happens. So we may run to protect ourselves, we may actually fight to protect ourselves, or we freeze because we're not really sure what to do next. And on to the next slide. Thank you. So here we have an image depicting what we call general adaptation syndrome. And this is a diagram that represents how we process stress. Now I'm going to break down stress into two different aspects. Eustress, that's EU stress, i.e. good stress, and then distress, or we could call harmful stress. So stress is good, i.e. it promotes growth and transformation, or it is harmful. For example, it will cause a decline in our health and well-being. And often this is dependent on our perception of the stress. So I may see a specific situation as a good thing, and you may see it as something that is going to be harmful for you. And then how our bodies will respond will be different based on how we see these stressors. So normally when we're affected by a stress, our body responds to maintain homeostasis, and that is to keep us stable, centered, healthy, strong. We then have an alarm go off, so that's the sympathetic nervous system depicted in the previous slide. And then we try to resist that stress, and we will either prevail by responding in an adaptogenic way, or we will be harmed by that stress physiologically and mentally and be affected by it in that way. And on to the next slide. So how do we ensure that we respond in a way that is going to help us to transform and not be taken down by that stressor? I love this quote by Viktor Frankl, and it says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." So stress and the survival response are the result of being unable to predict our future at times. Opening our minds and our hearts to believe in another possibility often means going against those survival instincts. We are hardwired to survive. However, when we're operating at that high level of stress for extended periods of time, this can certainly impact our overall health and well-being, and it may be very well misplaced because actually what we need to do is respond in a different way. So how do we respond in a different way? Happens in this space that Viktor Frankl is talking about, the space between stimulus and response. What we need to do is disturb the neural networks equated with fear, anxiety, and worry, and instead activate the networks related to patience, compassion, understanding, trust, faith, and hope. The repetition of these choices will neurochemically condition our mind and our body to work together. And this is called consciousness. As human beings, we have this ability to choose to be more conscious in any given moment. Recall that that is a choice. It is not necessarily something that we do by default if we haven't trained ourselves to develop this ability to be conscious. And once we cultivate a more adaptive and resilient state of well-being, we will memorize these new ways of responding so that they become more of a default mode rather than more of the mechanical survival way of approaching a situation. Your power lies in the moment between the stimulus and the response where you choose to make a different decision. And I'd like to invite everybody now to think of a time when you were in a reactionary mode. Perhaps the anxiety was really high, or the worry or the fear, and you felt your heart rate go up. You felt your breathing rate go up. Perhaps you started to sweat, your stomach started to turn, and you felt anxious. And then in the middle of that, somehow through your finding your breath or thinking of something that you remembered that would help you in that moment of difficulty, you were able to slow your response down and not necessarily react to the situation, but rather respond. Maybe not in that specific moment, but perhaps at another time when you felt calmer and you felt more centered. Next slide, please. So there is good news, and that is that we are designed as human beings to adapt. Here we have an image of the frontal lobe of the brain, where you see that light hitting that aspect. And when we are in our creative rather than a reactive mode, we're activating this creative center and the creative centers of the frontal lobe. So this is comprised of the prefrontal cortex. It is the newest and most evolved part of our human nervous system. It is also the adaptive aspect of the brain. It is the seat of our attention, focused concentration, awareness, observation of ourselves and others, and our consciousness. When our frontal lobe is working, it looks out over the entire landscape of what is going on in our brain and gathers the information. So if compassion is the new state of being that you would like to create, then once you ask yourself, what would it like to be compassionate? The frontal lobe naturally combines different neural networks together in new ways to create a new model or vision. It might take stored information from the books that you've read, personal experiences that you've had, and just being around other compassionate people in certain moments in your life. You'll take that and you'll spark the brain to work in new ways. Once the new neural pathway is operating, you will then see a picture or a vision of what compassion means to you. So in this light, all of the daily actions that you take to contribute to your well-being or lack of well-being will result in how you choose to adapt in any given moment. The power does lie in each and every one of us, and we absolutely do have the ability to choose to operate from the frontal lobe, more so. This takes practice. I'm sure many of you have worked with meditation or breathing or yoga or qigong. There's so many different kinds of practices that can help us with increasing our ability to observe ourselves and our consciousness. And ultimately, when you do a daily practice, this builds your resilience muscles and your adaptability muscles that come from your will. You know, we have to have the will to be resilient. And so the daily practices will help you in this. And next slide, please. So what are some of the behaviors that can help us become more adaptable? How to be more flexible. This is something that some of us find more easy to do, and for others it can be more challenging. But know that you can train yourself to become more flexible if it's something that you find challenging. It is a savvy strategy, and it makes it easier for us to align with the volatile impermanence of our world. On a basic level, we are motivated as human beings by the law of least effort. The default is to do what's easy. However, This leads to a mechanical way of living, which is unfulfilling and unconscious. And we are designed as human beings for higher heights in our life. We have a tremendous amount of potential. Many of us have not tapped into that potential. And consciousness practices help us to bring light to this potential and also help us to become more flexible so that we can move with the times. Number 2, have a meaningful goal. So studies show that by having the right goal, meaning that there's an intrinsic motivation from yourself, will help you in being able to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to do. You're more likely to stick with the goal if it actually means something to you intrinsically. When we act from an internal goal, like service, growth, or community support, we are more willing to do something that we may not necessarily really want to do or like to do. We do it for the intrinsic value and for the greater good. Number 3, be creative. As tool-building creatures, we have been able to solve obstacles on the road to civilization with creativity and improvisation. For many of us, recently, we've had to change the way that we do a lot of activities at the office and at home with our families and our coworkers. We can get upset about it, or we can choose to find creative improvisations. And I think many of us have been working with that over the last 8 or 9 months. Now, the benefit of all this is that when we do alter behaviors and learn new behaviors, it helps us in 2 areas crucial for psychological health and well-being. And that is, number 1, mastery, and number 2, agency. So being able to act on our own and to be effective in figuring things out. Number 4, reappraise change. Our brains actually want novelty and challenge more than anything else in the long term. We are programmed for engagement with our world, and it's one of the reasons that we like to see over the horizon, to see what's next, to look into the future for our goals. Many of us love to travel and to see new cultures and meet new kinds of people and see the way that they live. So we truly are seeking novelty as human beings, the new, the changes, on a deep core level. So to embrace that, especially now. Number 5, to be open. Be willing to try new things, experiment, follow your creativity. And when we are willing to be open, we have an easier time at being able to handle changes. And we have a greater opportunity coming to us in being able to learn from these new experiences. Number 6, focus on cooperation. So when we focus on cooperation, we can cultivate more friendships with people that perhaps we didn't know so much before. We're more community orientated. We focus on the more altruistic aspects of our innate human nature. And ultimately, we cultivate more happiness when we focus on others. Compassion naturally arises as a result, and our well-being increases when we focus on helping other people. Number 7, practicing patience. So they say that patience is bitter, but its fruits are sweet. And I'm sure many of us would agree that patience is a huge muscle that we're all being somewhat forced to cultivate right now, not being able to travel to see family or even just travel to experience and enjoy the things that we normally do, not being able to get together with our loved ones. This all requires strengthening this muscle, knowing that it's all ultimately going to be helpful. To build a stronger muscle of patience helps in so many areas of life. I find that a lot of the time in my experiences working with my patients and my clients over the years, and I listen to their stories of health and the challenges that they faced in their life, many choices that they made along the way happened in a hurried manner or in an impatient way. And when they look back on their life and they speak about what they wish they'd done differently, many times they share that they wish had been more patient. They wish that they wouldn't have rushed into something, that they had really looked at all of the different factors and found the strength to work more from this virtue of patience. So it's bitter, but the fruits are sweet. And whenever we exercise more patience, I think that we learn more about the beauty of slowing life down a little bit and really taking in the deeper aspects and the depths of life that can be experienced. Now, there's the depth of life, and then there's the expansion of life. And I think at this time, we're being invited to really move into the depth of this virtue of patience. And finally, seeing adapting as problem solving. So when we encounter any type of challenge or obstacle, rather than taking it personally, which is really easy to do at times, we can look at it as an opportunity to be a detective and try to put the clues together and figure it out. More of an adventure that we're on, where we're solving the problem and trying to find solutions and not taking it personally. Next slide. So these are two strategies that I really like that can help us to adapt, and they're really easy to do. I would encourage you all to take a moment and try them out right now as I'm speaking about them. So mental framing is exactly what it sounds like. People who see stressful events as challenges with an opportunity to learn and adapt tend to cope much better than those who focus more on the threatening aspects, like the possibility of failure, embarrassment, or illness. This influences not just our mood, but it actually influences our physiological responses in our body. And of course, this is going to affect our health. So how you see a situation as an opportunity or as something that's going to harm you will affect your ability to cope and adapt with that situation. Let's look at mental rehearsal. So neuroscience has proven that we can change our brains just by thinking differently. It is through this concept of mental rehearsal, where we repeatedly imagine performing an action, that the circuits in our brains can reorganize themselves to reflect our intentions. In one study done where the participants mentally rehearsed one-pointed finger exercises for 2 hours a day for 5 days, it demonstrated the same activity in the brain as those who actually did the exercise. So what that shows us is that by rehearsing how we're going to cope with a situation in advance, this can help us in being able to find the ability to adapt when it actually arises. So if you see yourself in the near future encountering something which could very well be stressful for you, meaning harmfully stressful, perhaps rehearse how you would like to see that event unfold, and just go through that in your mind, visualize it, and see that you're calm, feel it in your body. Feel yourself taking deep breaths while you're in the middle of the situation, and embrace that situation with compassion and kindness towards yourself. And the next slide. So this is an interesting study that was done on the resilience center of the brain. And did you know that we have a resilience center of the brain? It is called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. It's a very long name. And it lights up on the MRI for those who use it, and it does not light up for those who don't use it. So these aspects can all be measured nowadays, and resilience is this interplay between neurochemical, genetic, and epigenetic processes over time. So I think that this aspect of genetic and epigenetic is important to acknowledge, in that, yes, much of what we experience in our life is due to genetics. Much of what we experience in our life is also due to epigenetics. And epigenetics points to this aspect of being able to influence our genetics based on the conscious choices that we make in our life. And the more consciousness that we exercise, the more that we can activate our epigenetics. So it's really up to you how much consciousness that you'd like to bring into, in particular, your ability to respond to various stressors that come your way. So hormones, neurotransmitters, and neural circuits associated with resilience affect our vulnerability to stressful situations. So there is an interplay of all these different aspects in our being, and our consciousness also affects this. It affects how our hormonal system operates. It affects how our nervous system operates. So again, we come back to the importance of meditation, breathing, yoga, etc. There's several different practices, even going for a walk in nature and just calming your breath down. Although it may seem simplistic, the power is huge in being able to affect and influence your overall sense of well-being and your health as a result. And on to the next slide. So the science of hope and the effect on resilience is something that I think we should all take to heart. You know, that hope involves belief and expectation, and it causes the brain to release neurochemicals called endorphins and enkephalins, which actually mimic the effects of morphine. Essentially, it means that by being more hopeful, it is acting like a painkiller for us. Hope can be measured reliably. There's something called the Adult Hope Scale. It's one of the resources that's in one of the handouts that you'll receive later today. And you can go onto this site and you can actually do this scale for yourself. It looks at 4 items that measure your pathways of thinking, 4 items that measure agency thinking, and 4 other items. Various traditions around the world have identified hope as a virtue to be cherished and cultivated. And hope is a strong predictor of psychological, educational, interpersonal, and health outcomes. So those who are more hopeful, ultimately, we can see are going to be happier, not only with respect to their mental health, but also physical health can benefit from having more of an attitude of hope. Positive expectations for the future, which is hope, is an adaptation mechanism. So yes, it will help us to adapt, it will help us to become more resilient, and it will help us to become healthier overall. As I mentioned earlier, epigenetics shows us that the genes received at conception, so this is called our genotype, are not a fixed blueprint for development. Genes are constantly turned on and off across the lifespan, and these epigenetic changes are due to a host of factors like exercise, nutrition, the quality and perception of social relationships that we have in our lives, and also other physiological, psychological, and social influences. Hope plays a huge role in this. And on to the next slide. So how can you transform yourself to have a more resilient mindset? Leaders and managers can build higher levels of resilience in themselves and their teams by transforming how they think about adversity. Now, how do we do that? When you have one train of thought and you want to change to another train of thought, this is how we do it. We spend just the appropriate amount of time on understanding what caused the events, and we move quickly into forward-thinking response planning. Resilient leaders move quickly from over-dissecting an event to determining the best possible cause of action given the new reality. So we need to accept our reality more quickly to become more resilient. And often what I see happen is that people will focus on the past and ruminate rather than being in the present and accepting that this is what's happening. Breathing will help us to accept more quickly. And so we would encourage that for everybody here to focus on your breathing in these moments. So improvement-oriented thinking will help moving on to what is it that we need to do next. Greater positive impact rather than asking what is the internal or external force that has caused this. Let's focus on what we can do positively moving forward. Having a greater vision, not spending time on the root causes so much in the beginning, but doing that more later and focusing on how we can implement strategies to help people move forward. And forward action, which is essentially taking that step. And on to the next slide. Okay, so let's take a moment and do our Slido exercise here. So what is your own experience with resilience? Do you have examples of how you've built resilience within yourself, such as exercise, spending time with others, community, mindfulness? So we'll invite everybody to think about this for a moment and you can share with us. Okay, so we've got some great answers here. Yoga and pranayama, exercise, quiet time to unwind, cooking, okay. To be upbeat, walking with friends, reading is very popular. Focus on my goals, wonderful. So these are all strategies, and I think that this coupled with bringing in some other things that we've talked about today will be helpful moving forward so that you can build this and strengthen the adaptability and resilience muscles within yourself. Oh, wow, there's lots more. Chocolate helps. Okay, great. Cacao is very highly antioxidant, so yes, I would agree with that. Gardening, wonderful. Had great parents. Wow, okay, jogging, housework, yeah. You know what I see as a common thread with all of these written here is that they focus on moving forward, and I think that that's the key. Whenever we're in a very stressful situation, just look at what is the next baby step that you need to do. And then the next baby step. And then you can start taking some bigger steps as you feel your strength come in and as you feel yourself become more centered. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. So let's move to the next slide then. So we can draw so much inspiration from people in this world who have survived great travesties, and we can learn, what does it take to adapt? We as human beings have a huge capacity to be flexible in the face of challenges. We shift locations, comfort zones, ideas, self-images. We deal with all kinds of weather, city life, parents, teachers, supervisors, children. We're constantly having to adapt. And adaptability is a characteristic that combines many different elements: our cognitive ability, personality traits, our coping skills. And in the middle of a pandemic, it's good for us to dig into these different skills that we have. So let's look at some of these people. Viktor Frankl, He survived the Holocaust, the only person in his family, a psychiatrist who shares this wonderful quote that I'll share with you now. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. The Dalai Lama is known for his compassion, being mindful and being selfless. Nelson Mandela, known for his bravery, determination, and humility. And finally, those who are survivors of great illnesses and who have overcome those illnesses often have one characteristic that is common between them, and this is written about in a wonderful book called Cured, The Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing. And that is they change themselves to the point where they don't recognize who they are. They work in chipping away at all the things that are not authentic to them, and they cultivate that sense of authenticity once again. And the next slide, please. So these pillars of resilience help us to find our strength to be able to cope on a daily basis. Self-awareness, which is something we've spoken a lot about today. So this is something that we cultivate with daily reflection and self-observation. So when you wake up in the morning, take time to reflect on how you're feeling, do an inventory, and just observe what are those emotions that are coming up for you when you wake up at the start of your day. And once you strengthen that muscle at the start of the day, then it's going to be turned on for the rest of the day. And you will observe yourself more and more frequently. You'll get more information about what's working for you, what's not working for you. Where do you need to go to find the information to help you to advance in your life and make progress in areas where you're feeling that you're understanding. This comes with self-observation. And also relaxation is very helpful for us to be able to move to a place where we can understand when we're in the thick of a fight or flight response, we can't think straight. We're just in a reactionary mode. So we need to come to a place of relaxation, and then we can self-observe, reflect, and meditate, and then decide what it is that we need to do next. Self-care, which involves, and I always recommend, regular waking and sleeping times. Our bodies love routine, especially during stressful times. Eating at regular times during the day is also very important. Ensuring that you're getting enough water, that you're moving enough. We have muscles in our body which help us to move. And I think it's important to remember that. That's why we have muscles. And they developed at a time when we were moving all the time in the past. Nowadays we spend a lot of time sitting, so likely more movement will be helpful for most of us. And then time for relaxation, self-reflection, beneficial relationships. I always say, be the type of friend that you wish to have, and this will embellish your life with a lot more beauty and happiness. So beneficial relationships help us especially in times of stress, where we can reach out and connect. And that is our true nature, to be able to connect. And finally, having the purpose and impact. So taking the time to reflect on what authentically moves you towards greater fulfillment. If you have all of these pillars in place in your daily life, or at least you're working towards them, you're on the path to implementing them in your life, then you have the strength when there is a strong stressor that comes your way to be able to cope better, because you've been taking better care of yourself. So I hope you find these pillars helpful in your life, and I think now we'll take an opportunity to move on to some questions and hear from you who have been listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Mehta, for all of this knowledge you've shared with us just now. I've been taking notes myself, but don't worry, everyone. If you are interested in the notes as well, we'll have the PDF slides on our website. We'll give you the URL to our website a little bit later on in the session. But thank you so much for taking the time to explain all of this to us. And I hope that it's been useful to everyone who's been listening and seeing. So yes, it is time to head over to Q&A. We do have one more Slido question for you. So why don't we also put that one up on the screen so that people can start to reflect on that as we head to the Q&A. It's using the same QR code as before. So just a little reflection as we think about what Dr. Mehta has covered today. Are there any particular strategies or ideas from the session that you would like to try moving forward? Anything that really spoke to you? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But let's keep that up there for the Q&A and see if anyone has anything they'd like to share. But we do have a lot of questions coming in, and I really hope that we can answer as many as possible. The first question that did come in earlier was, how do we respond to stress in a balanced way? I think perhaps Dr. Mehta's slides did answer that question, but maybe Dr. Mehta, if there's one thing you could say to respond to this question, how can we respond to stress in a balanced way? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that we need to remind ourselves of every single day, because each stressor that comes our way is unique and individual, and we don't know how we're going to respond until it happens. So we can do all the preparation in advance, but the one thing that I find that always is helpful is to stop and breathe. That's the first thing that goes when we're stressed, is we stop breathing. And I'd like to challenge everybody to observe themselves in particular for the rest of the day and tomorrow, and notice, what is it that makes you stop breathing? And then to observe that, and then to breathe. Take some deep breaths, and then feel yourself calm down. Remove yourself from the stressful situation if it's with others, and go for a walk and reflect. And most guaranteed that when you come back to that stressful situation, you will respond very differently than had you reacted in the moment.
Great, thank you, Dr. Mehta. I've been trying to focus more on my breathing these days too, to notice it a little bit more. Great. So another question that's come in is, how do you identify the difference between stress and anxiety? This is a good question, especially perhaps to know how to best respond. Over to you, Dr. Mehta.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, stress is kind of like one of these words like health. It's you have to ask, what do you mean? What do you mean by health? Your perception of health could be different than mine. Your perception of stress could be different than mine. But if we were to take stress as something where we can learn and grow from versus something that will harm us, often anxiety shows up initially with all stress because it's new. And that anxiety might be just a little bit, and then sometimes it can be a lot. So when anxiety or worry is present, again, I would go back to the breath and just take some space so that you can observe and then try to understand what's causing it. Often it's connected with previous situations in the past, and we're responding to something in the present. It's triggering a memory, or it could be something new. And it takes time to understand anxiety. It's not something that you can really address so instantly. So taking the time, I think, is important.
Great. There are a few questions here that I would like to kind of ask you in one go, if that's okay for our questioners, just because of time. And it's about having multiple kind of demands on us that can, I guess, build upon cumulatively in terms of stress, family, workload. How do we balance all these different stresses?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And I think it's something that many people are facing right now. So self-care, let's come back to the pillars. If we don't have those pillars strong on the ground with ourselves, it's going to be very difficult to multitask all the external stressors that we're needing to deal with. So we all have limits. I think it's important to recognize our boundaries of how much we can cope with in a healthy way. We can take on the next stress and the next stress and the next stress, but then how is that going to impact our health? And I think again, as a naturopathic physician, I'm constantly guiding my patients to greater health. That's my goal. So when the stressors are starting to infringe on one's ability to maintain their health, that's when we need to kind of adjust, I think. And sometimes those multiple stressors we just have to deal with all at once because of whatever reason. Sometimes we can adjust and sort of put something off for a bit and just focus on a few. So I think we let's try to be creative with how we can manage the stressors. And when it feels overwhelming, like there's too much, then ask for guidance, ask for help. That's really important. Something we don't have to do it all by ourselves. And remember, we have a frontal brain. We have a creative ability to find new solutions. And this is another opportunity for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, I was going to mention if there are lots of stresses, perhaps it's also we would need to find, I guess, sometimes some strength to be able to communicate what we need help with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
There is a relevant question here, a connected one, it seems. Is it normal that when you want to think of the problem and break it down, that it can actually make us feel a bit more stressed? Any advice there?
That's a very, very good question. So this is why the practices of meditation and observation are so helpful, because you have your stressor here, but then when you observe it, you're observing it from here, from a bird's eye view. So you're somewhat separated from it based on your consciousness. You're not so identified with it. And that's where we want to be when we're assessing a challenging situation. If we're too identified with it, then it can aggravate us further. But when we observe it, for example, go out into nature, go for a walk, and then start to contemplate. Feel yourself relax before you start to contemplate. Think about something completely different that calms you down. Take your dog for a walk, or talk to your partner, or paint. Something that gets you out of the mindset of identifying with that stressor, and then come back, but from a bird's eye view. And that's a wise place to be working from.
Okay, so you mean that we kind of like disassociate ourselves from I guess the problems, not to say that they're not part of you, but to be objective.
Create some space. Get some room so it's not suffocating you. And once you have that space, you'll be able to see it more clearly. And sometimes it can take time. Sometimes when I'm dealing with something that's very stressful, I'll go for a run and I'll go burn some energy, and then I'll feel much better and I'll be able to see it with new eyes. Or I'll just go down to the beach and I'll watch the ocean, and then something will come and it'll say, this is how you need to deal with the situation. It's not as bad as you thought it was. So taking that space is very important.
Yeah. There are a few more questions, and we'd love to get to them very quickly. One that I think you can answer straight away is, if you could share, please, the title and author of the book Cured that you mentioned.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So two people have asked for that.
Okay. So if you look for it, it's called Cured, the Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing. The author I don't have written here, but you should be able to find it, no problem.
Great. Yeah. So Cured,
the
Life-Changing Science. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And there's one more here that I thought was interesting, and maybe you had mentioned it, but the concept of strategic patience. Maybe you could enlighten us a bit more on what that means and how we can grow it.
Absolutely. So all of the virtues, patience, compassion, generosity, kindness, etc., humility, gratitude, they all help us and they all work together. So when we take, again, we're talking about space, we're talking about giving ourselves time, we're talking about slowing our reactions down. It allows us to access more of an objective way of looking at any given situation. If we don't exercise patience, often what happens is we respond mechanically, reflexively, based on our personal judgments, which is often completely incorrect. Now, when we respond objectively from a place of patience and compassion and kindness, then we're able to work with the situation in a much wiser way. We're able to see all of the different parts more clearly. And oftentimes, we need to think of a strategic solution to the situation or the conflict that we're dealing with. We can't do that when we're reacting. You know, when we're coming from a place of patience, we often think of things that we didn't think of before. It's the same as if you're, let's say you're giving a presentation or you're giving a talk to your coworkers or something. And if you write everything down and you just give it as is, it's going to be different than if you wait 2 weeks because you've been thinking about it and you've been thinking about all the people and you've been thinking about the different aspects that you need to address and how to ensure that everybody's more taken care of, and you'll get more information about how to help. So that's why it's always better to exercise more patience. And if you don't know how to respond, wait until you can respond rather than react, especially from an emotional place where it's going to be charged and coming from your own personal experience rather than what's best for everyone.
Great advice. Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. I think we got to cover all the questions, which is great. Thank you so much for being here all the way from Vancouver early in the morning for you. We really appreciate it, and we hope everyone has learned from this session. We will have the slides and the recording, as well as a list of ideas from Dr. Mehta in terms of helping to build resilience and adaptability on our website, which we're going to show you on the screen very soon. But we just want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're almost done for the year, but not yet. So talking about breathing and mindfulness, we have 2 sessions coming up in December, one in English next Monday, which is with Mary. So please join us at 9 a.m. on Monday to start your week with some breathing and some mindfulness. On the 21st of December, right before Christmas, we will have also a mindfulness meditation session in French. So you'll find the details on our website to be able to connect here again on MS Teams live event. We would love for you to join us, so please do go ahead to do that. If you have any feedback for us on this session or ideas for future sessions next year on this topic of mental health and well-being and the science behind it all, we'd love to hear from you. So please do email us at commons@un.org if you do have any feedback, or head to our website as well. We have a feedback form there. So we hope that you can see that on the screen now. Fantastic, as well as our website. If you'd like to find more information, join us for the rest of the year or next year when we'll be back with a lot more sessions on a range of topics. So thank you to Dr. Mehta, to Mary and Rosa as well for bringing us this session, to all of our producers behind the scenes. You haven't seen their faces, but they've been working really hard on this. And most importantly to you for taking the time. So many of you have showed up to today's session. So we're really glad for that. We hope that the rest of the year brings you some joy and some peace, no matter where you are and no matter where it finds you, that you have a great holiday. We hope to see you soon at the Commons. This is us for now. Have a great rest of the week and the holidays as well. Bye, and see you soon at the Commons.
Thank you. Bye.